Welcome to the Growth Desk, where we are spotlighting the innovators reshaping wealth management with the power of AI. And today, I'm joined by Mark Gilbert, CEO of Zox, a company that's helping thousands of advisory firms turn everyday inefficiencies into scalable growth opportunities. So, everything from client acquisition to advisor enablement, Zox is embedding AI into the very workflows that drive firm level success. So we'll explore where advisors are losing valuable time, how AI can unlock productivity gains, and how Zox is helping firms not just automate, but accelerate. So, Mark, thanks so much for joining me.
Awesome. Thanks, Shannon. Happy to be here.
So let's dive right in. I want to hear about what specific inefficiencies in an advisor's day to day when it comes to AI that Zox can ultimately solve. I feel like this is the $1 million question here.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. It is the big question, I think, for advisors. So for us, we look at advisors today and they're spending well over 50% of their time. And there's a lot of studies on this in what we think of as administrative and back office tasks instead of spending that time with clients. And so with Zox, that's really where we started focusing. And specific items are, we see them spend a lot of time filling out forms, for their clients or asking their clients to do it and then fixing those, right? That could be anything from like opening accounts to, moving money, any of those types of things. We see a huge amount. We know that people like discussing things with their advisors. Advisors like to be talking with their clients, but the preparation for those meetings and the follow-up for those meetings is very heavy. Often, like equally as long as the meeting and sometimes even much longer, right? Like sometimes it's 45 minutes to an hour for an hour client meeting. Some people we talk with spend 2 to 3 hours. And then the other one that we're seeing more and more of is, clients like to communicate with advisors quickly, in whatever format they want. So we see a lot of email coming in to advisors where it's taking them, each email isn't necessarily really long, but when you add all those up over the day, it takes them, an hour to 2 hours a day on that as well. So what we've done is we've really combined those, we've used AI to combine a set of assistants to really make advisors more productive there. So saving them, 45 minutes to an hour kind of before and after a client meeting. Some people save even a lot more if they're a lot deeper. For emails, typically an hour, sometimes 2 hours a day if they're getting a lot of emails from clients. And I'll talk to you as well, not just about like the time saving, but the other value that that brings them. And then similarly, across the course of a week, some weeks are lighter and some are heavier, but you will often see the advisors or their administrative team spending 5 to 10 hours filling out forms as well and getting those in. Not to mention all the time that not to mention all the time that that takes in a what we call calendar time, right? So like, the advisor may spend time or their team on it, but it also means that the client may not see a result for days instead of hours or minutes.
So the time savings aspect is very clear. And as I mentioned in the intro, you work now with a few thousand firms. So
Yeah.
outside of just the time savings, how are advisors using AI to acquire more clients?
Yeah. So, it really depends on, I would say, the advisor or the firm and where their business is. Are they early on and growing? Do they have a big set that they're trying to work with more? But at a high level, what we see is a few key patterns. One is, if they're able to talk with a client, with a prospect, I should say, right? And now with the AI assistants that we have, they can literally leave that meeting, click a few buttons, and get, intake forms filled out, get a very targeted personal email back to that client, and even a proposal using certain proposal systems um, out to that client literally in minutes. So, like, we have one advisor who is like, when they leave the office, within 10 or 15 minutes, we have this, like in their inbox ready. So, by the time they get home, if they were in person, or by the time they even look at it, and before, like, as I mentioned, not only is it saving them time, the advisor time, but the big thing from a client point of view is, like it often would be a few days before they would, the advisor and their team would have time to put all that together and send it back. And so what that results in is that they're getting much faster advice, I'll say, and recommendations and service. And it's much more personal for them as well because everything is tailored for them. And so that we see helping just frankly close rates go up. With the time saving, we also see two other big patterns. We see a number of firms and advisors who are now able to do a meeting with, what we would call, they would never call them this obviously in their world, but like kind of a tier two, maybe a second tier or third tier client that has a smaller book of business with them. And, they can now do those meetings because they can often do a meeting, including prep, the actual meeting, and getting all the follow-ups out in like an hour or less, where that may have taken 2 to 4 hours before. So it allows them to touch base with those clients. And very often those clients have assets that they can start to help with and do more with. And then even kind of beyond Zox, what we see is, because we're giving them a lot of time back, and, if you look at other, kind of like newer systems that are really powerful around like estate management and things like that, like Vanilla or Wealth.com, they can actually take a number of these AI systems and almost pull them in together and start to offer new services to their existing clients, and frankly, for them in the same period of time, which also allows them to grow the business. So we see all of those. And then, as you'd expect, also sometimes it's as simple as, you get an advisor or an associate in their team time back, and they can just spend more time marketing, right? Like reaching out to people, doing those events that are really helpful, and those types of things too.
So you mentioned something interesting there around kind of those associate roles, because AI doesn't just impact the advisor, it trickles down into
Yeah.
really every role at the firm now. So at that firm level, how can leaders use AI to help associate advisors build their own book of business even?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So we have a number of things built in with AI, and these have come out fairly recently for us. So like what we think of as coaching and scorecards, and it helps in two big ways. So one, again, is, first of all, associates are just getting time back. They used to sit in these meetings with advisors and frankly be typing most of the time because they didn't want to miss anything. Now they can focus on the client, they can start to take actions with them, and they frankly just learn faster because they're, like mentally engaged in the conversation, that the client's having with an advisor. But once they start to have their own meetings with clients too, we do offer and have this capability to scorecard them, to give them insights on like what was the client engaging with, what weren't they engaging with, what was the most engaging question that they had asked. Was the client speaking enough? Were they getting them to speak? How do they get them to speak? All of these types of things. And it's helpful for two big reasons. One is the associates are getting both feedback from the conversation, and they can even get some of this in real time now in Zox in the meeting, so they can see how it's going. But then also the advisors, we find as soon as we give them the scorecards for their associates, they can also help coach them very quickly, right? Because they're like, oh yeah, like I used to have that problem when I was, learning and everything else. And so they can give very specific feedback to the associates. And it's just much quicker. So the associates start learning more quickly. And then as a nice side effect, what we see is the associates also start to get more confidence because of that, right? Like one, I'm sure we've all seen this, right? With someone new in career, especially at this one, is some of them are just a little nervous, right? Like they're sitting there with potentially a client that's very important to the firm, often older than they are, and like reasonably wealthy, and they're just like a little nervous. And so this is giving them confidence to essentially go in and have those discussions because they know nothing's going to get missed, and they essentially are getting a bit more guidance on how to have that and how to engage with them.
Well, the hope, like you said, is obviously for AI to help instill that confidence so they can focus on the things that truly matter, which is ultimately servicing that client. But kind of in that similar vein, the reality is in our space is that a lot of advisors are still skeptical about AI replacing that human judgment, if you will. So,
Yep.
how do you position Zox as an augmentation tool rather than a replacement? And maybe what role does human intuition still play in your vision for the future?
Yeah, so for us, we really focus on using AI to what we think of as like augment and accelerate the advisor and their team. So at a very base level, the advisor and their team are always in the loop. Like we never communicate with clients directly today. We never, like automatically do anything for them. What we do is essentially give them the data in the exact structure they need so they can review it quickly and take action when they want. So we will recommend things, not like actions with their clients and things like that, but essentially like, hey, we think this was the follow-up you wanted to do. We think this is here. So they can click and go through and do it. The other big thing that we see is, our view is that as we can get, like, if you just think about it at a very basic kind of mathematical level, right? If we can get 50% of their time back from this administrative work and give them better data about their clients at all the time. And when I say better data, what it really is like there's a lot of information on the clients. And so it's like what's most helpful for the advisor, the associate, or their team at that time, given what they want to do. If we can get that right in front of them at the time and get rid of the administrative work, what we see is that the advisors are able to like up level, frankly, as well as the associates, and spend the time on the things that matter most, right? If the client is clearly nervous or uncomfortable, maybe about an upcoming life event or some situation, right? Like that client values that discussion very highly. The advisors generally would rather be having those discussions. And so it really is about their judgment, and giving them all the information they have to use it. Like the analogy we use internally, I think a lot of people will understand, is like if you think that you're a teacher, right? Like we're not going to go grade the paper. What we're going to do is give the teacher all of the information very concisely on, like, did it do this? Did it do this? How do they do this? So they can scan it and grade it without having to read through like 20 pages of things. And we see a very similar kind of analogy in financial services, which is like, what is Mark's personal situation right now? What is his demeanor? Like, what is he worried about? What is he not typically? What is the situation? And then the advisor can scan that and be like, oh, okay, given that, yeah, I know what we should do here, right? Or I know how maybe I can talk him through to get comfortable with this thing that we're recommending. And that's really where we see the power. And as you know, like for a whole bunch of reasons, the industry has a lot, like, it has a lot of regulation, has a lot of compliance and needs and data security needs for good reason. And that's resulted in, frankly, a lot of like paperwork and now digital paperwork. And so the more of that we can remove and really focus on that to make the advisor better, that's really where kind of our North Star is.
Fantastic. Well, Mark, it is always just an absolute pleasure getting to talk to you and getting a look under the hood. So thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thanks, Shannon. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of The Growth Desk. Again, a big thank you to Mark Gilbert of Zox for showing us how AI can move the needle, not just on efficiency, but on meaningful growth for advisors and their firms. So if you're ready to stop spinning your wheels and start scaling a little bit smarter, be sure to check out Zox and see how AI can work for you. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time at The Growth Desk, where innovation meets impact.